Genetically engineered simply means you've now inserted, in this case, not directly, but through the mRNA conversion into DNA process, your DNA has been altered. You will then at least possibly and maybe probably start putting out new copies of this altered DNA, and you will start making proteins based on this new DNA copy that has been inserted into your genome. In fact, I would argue that's exactly how they expect it to work.
And I'm quoting right now, straight out of Moderna's own statement. Key secondary endpoints include prevention of severe COVID-19 disease and prevention of infection by SARS-CoV-2. But here comes a tiny little problem. By their own admission in their clinical study, it was, and I'm quoting, impractical to measure infection. That's right, you heard me correctly.
Impractical.
It's impractical to measure infection, so there is no evidence inside the phase 3 clinical trials that any of the gene therapy had anything to do with the infection or not of SARS-CoV-2. You cannot have a vaccination. It's not under the legal definition of vaccination. You cannot have a vaccination that is in fact not meeting either an immune or a transmission standard. And their clinical trial was set up specifically so that it could not measure either of those things. And then let's quote, shall we, from the New England Journal of Medicine and from the Lancet. And this is October and this is December, respectively. And I'm just going to go ahead and read this quote. At the time of this writing, no correlate of protection from SARS-CoV-2 has been established.
There you go.
Maybe you misheard what I just said.
That needs repeating.
As of this writing, no correlate of protection for SARS-CoV-2 has been established. In other words, not a shred of evidence from the clinical trials said anything about protection from infection with SARS-CoV-2, which means every single person who has value signaled their vaccination because they're doing their part not to be infected with SARS-CoV-2 and not to get COVID-19, newsflash, you have been violating the Federal Trade Commission Act by deceptive practices. You've been telling people that there is a protection that the data itself does not afford.
Fantastic.
Hey, but maybe that was just one report. So why don't I read from the second report? And I quote, and this is Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine, quote, no existing vaccines have been shown to be effective against infection with any beta coronavirus, the family that includes SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19.
There you go, black and white.
People, this isn't my opinion. This is not me selectively choosing to take a spin on facts. This is, in fact, fact. Which then begs the question, Kim, what would motivate Pfizer and Moderna, and more importantly, Felonious Fauci,
the unsavories, everyone.
The unsavory, what would motivate them and CDC and others to lie to the American people about this being a vaccine? Because vaccines, in the ordinary course of the use of that term, invokes within the listener a presumption of protection against infection and protection against transmission, neither of which have been established at all. Why would they use the term vaccine? And here's where we have to depart from the facts and we have to go into conjecture, because that's the only thing we have available to us. As recently as 2018, Moderna was insisting that they were not making vaccinations. They were insisting that this is gene therapy technology and it was cutting edge and it was all this kind of nonsense. And suddenly, courtesy of SARS-CoV-2, it suddenly became a vaccine company. It wasn't a vaccine company before. It's not a vaccine company now. It's a gene therapy technology company with an unproven gene therapy. That's what it is. So one has to ask the question, okay, so why do we keep hearing about vaccines? Well, here's the reason I think we keep hearing about vaccines. And once again, my opinion here, people, this is not based on information that I have readily available, but it is my opinion. I think that if Anthony Fauci, if Moderna, if Pfizer, and if others, public health authorities around the country and around the world, actually called this gene therapy, chemotherapy, number one,
be realistic.
People wouldn't want to take it. And they wouldn't want to take it for a good reason. Mm-hmm. Because experimental gene therapy is a bad idea no matter who it is, no matter when it is, no matter where it is. Experimental gene therapy should not be relentlessly and recklessly distributed to a population. That shouldn't happen. So that's number one. But number two is the 1986 liability exclusion. And this is what I think it really is. See, as long as Mr. Alex M. Azar, the director or the Secretary of Department of Health and Human Services, as long as Alex Azar keeps the state of emergency going, as long as every governor and every mayor and every unelected official keeps the state of emergency going, under emergency use authorization rules, liability is a shield that's afforded to people like Pfizer and Moderna and others. So they're making billions of dollars on the back of something for which they have no liability. But if this was not a vaccine,
then they do.
Then all of a sudden the liability shield would vanish.
Magic.
Because there is not a liability shield under the 1986 Act for a medical countermeasure that is gene therapy. Which means we're probably having governors and the Health and Human Services and CDC and others maintaining the illusion of a state of emergency, not because there's a state of emergency. They're maintaining it because it maintains the illusion of the liability shield. Mm-hmm. Remember that if you suspended the state of emergency today, like, I don't know, if you're the governor of South Dakota and you ever have anybody who remotely cares about this matter listening to this video, lift the state of emergency, because on the day you do it, RT-PCR can't be used. Because RT-PCR is not a diagnostic. It has never been approved, and it does not and cannot diagnose and treat a disease. Which means every time Bloomberg, Gates Foundation, and Zuckerberg Foundation COVID-19 dashboard reports that there is another case of COVID-19 because of a positive RT-PCR test, they are violating the 15 U.S. Code Federal Trade Commission Act. You cannot diagnose a thing that cannot diagnose a thing. So maybe the reason why they're calling it a vaccine is because they can count on the fact that neither you nor I will ever have this video. You and I will never do this independent inquiry. You and I will never ask the question,